On the 12th of May, 1945, the train slowed with a shudder, its iron wheels screeching along the tracks, and the women inside leaned forward, their faces pale under layers of grime. They had heard 1,000 tales about what lay ahead. Rumors murmured in barracks, propaganda bellowed by officers clinging to morale in a crumbling Reich. Some thought they'd be lined up and shot. Others feared being forced into mines for brutal labor, and nearly all dreaded assault and starvation. Their uniforms hung loose and wrinkled, boots split at the seams, hair bundled into rough knots. They were soldiers stripped of arms, aides without a battle, women adrift without a homeland. The train doors creaked open, and for the first time since surrender, fresh air rushed in, free from the stench of smoke and metal. One woman, perhaps 24 years old, her sharp cheekbones carved deeper by hunger, stepped out first. She pulled her coat tighter, as if that simple act could shield her from disgrace. All around, the landscape stretched quiet and flat, eerily pristine. Wooden fences ran into the horizon. Barbed wire glinted under the sun, sharp and orderly, but there were no yells, no snarling hounds. American guards in crisp uniforms stood by with cool composure, their rifles carried like everyday tools rather than instruments of fear. The very silence set nerves on edge. She steeled herself for brutality. Then came the scent, drifting on the breeze like a specter from another life, warm, greasy, unmistakably indulgent, bacon frying. She froze, and so did the women behind her. It felt impossible, almost indecent. Bacon belonged to faded memories, to mornings before rations, to kitchens where fathers returned with wages and children played without air raid warnings. To catch its aroma here, on the brink of captivity, was like hearing chuckles in a cemetery. Her empty stomach twisted in protest. She recalled her last meal back in Germany, a watery soup thinned with turnips and stale bread that crumbled to dust. She'd eaten it hastily, knowing her younger brother, if he still survived amid Leipzig's ruins, might have nothing at all. Yet here, the Americans were cooking pork for captives. Dizziness hit her, a mix of rage, shame, and an odd, unwilling longing. The guards motioned them into lines, their voices steady, but not harsh, one even attempting a fractured German phrase. Bitte, schnell. The women complied, each step drawing them closer to the intensifying breakfast aroma. For some, it was too much. One muttered curses at the Americans for taunting them with such extravagance. Another wept quietly, her hands shaking against her skirt. Yet, despite the terror, no one could stop breathing it in. The smell pulled like a lure, blending nostalgia and hunger into a dizzying whirl. Inside the camp, the scene unfolded with an almost staged oddity. The barracks were solid wood, lined with neat rows of straw mattresses. Sunlight streamed through windows. Buckets of water waited for washing. It wasn't luxury, but compared to the basements and charred shells many had called home, the setup felt deliberately structured. One woman whispered it reminded her of boarding school, her voice laced with bitterness, yet the words planted a risky hint of ease. The 24-year-old stared toward the mess hall, smoke curling from chimneys, glimpses of trays and actual plates, not tin mugs or slop pails, visible through open doors. Her throat tightened. She'd braced for shoving, insults, loss of dignity. Instead, there was a hushed efficiency, discipline without malice. She didn't trust it. None of them did. It had to be a ruse, a show to soften them before the strike. When they finally entered the hall, the sounds hit first, the crackle and sizzle of fat on hot iron. Soldiers in aprons, yes, soldiers wearing aprons, manned long counters, flipping bacon strips with metal tongs. The air shimmered with heat, salt, and smoke, carrying an oddly rhythmic normalcy. The women shuffled ahead, glances darting, struggling to square their dread with the bizarre sight. Plates were passed out, each holding bread, potatoes, and, to their shock, a strip or two of bacon. The 24-year-old gazed at hers, hand unsteady. She thought of her mother, lost in an air raid 2 winters back, gripping a photo of her father, who never came home from the Russian front. She pictured children begging on Dresden streets, bony hands grasping for coal scraps. And now, in enemy hands, bacon was offered. Her chest ached with confusion. She longed to refuse, to spit in defiance, to show she couldn't be broken so easily. But her body rebelled. She lifted the strip to her lips and bit down. The flavor overwhelmed, salty, fatty, warm. It flooded her mouth with echoes of the past, guilt and a relief so sharp it mimicked sorrow. Tears welled up, hot and unwanted. She ate fast, almost frantically, before sense could intervene. Others followed suit. Some laughed amid their tears. Some savored slowly, reverently, fearing it might vanish. A few pushed it away, pride clashing with need. For those moments, the room fell silent save for chewing. One American guard lounged by the door, watching. He looked about 30 years old, uniform pressed, expression neutral. But when a woman glanced up, their eyes met, and he gave a tiny shrug as if saying, "It's just breakfast." That gesture posed more threat than any gun. It hinted at a reality where foes weren't beasts, where captors could extend decency. It fractured the myths these women had been fed. As the meal wrapped up, they were guided back to quarters. The 24-year-old lay on her bunk, eyes fixed on the wooden ceiling. The taste lingered on her tongue. She felt burdened, yet unburdened, as if a massive weight had shifted but not lifted. She wasn't sure if she could believe in the Americans, if this was true generosity or cunning ploy. But one truth stood clear. Her view of the enemy had transformed over a single meal. That night, as quiet blanketed the camp, she heard the soft cadence of patrolling guards outside. No shouts, no dogs, just the even tread of boots on earth. She shut her eyes, but sleep evaded her. The bacon had satisfied her hunger, yet it stirred her thoughts. If the foe could provide structure, sustenance, even a form of compassion, what else might captivity reveal? The question burned fiercer than any emptiness. As dawn neared, the scent returned faintly on the morning breeze. She drew it in, aware that the conflict she now faced wasn't about troops or territories, but convictions. She'd been trained to anticipate savagery. Instead, she'd encountered bacon. It wasn't absolution or alliance, but something far riskier to her beliefs, evidence of an alternate truth. And the most disturbing fact? Breakfast was merely the start. The women soon discovered that the camp's fiercest battles weren't waged with rifles or blows, but with notions that eroded the foundations of everything they'd been taught. For years, they'd endured the relentless drum of propaganda. Posters shrieked of American atrocities, portraying men as greedy mercenaries. Radios sketched savages in uniform, eager to torch, degrade, and defile any captured German. Even those working desks or signal posts far from combat wore these visions like shields. They awaited a ferocity that would at least validate their terror. But the initial weeks in camp made those visions waver. The Americans knew little German, yet their manner remained even, their control unwavering. Commands came concise and sharp, but free of spite. Guards viewed the women as charges, not quarry. In place of famine, meals arrived on schedule. Instead of squalor, soap and water were provided. Rather than humiliation, a rigid routine prevailed. Each revelation disturbed them more than any barked slur ever could. The 24-year-old was haunted by the stark difference. She recalled training hall speeches where officers vowed capture equaled a fate worse than death. She remembered hushed alerts from elder women claiming Americans wielded knives for fun, chuckling as they slit throats. Now she passed tidy kitchens where aproned cooks stirred potato vats, their expressions bored, not brutal. She caught whiffs of real coffee, not the scorched barley she'd known for ages, and heard the clink of metal trays. She couldn't tell which pained more, the ache in her gut, or the turmoil in her head. Propaganda had been her guide, and now its pointer spun chaotically. The others sensed it too. At night, on slim mattresses, they whispered, pitting gossip against facts. One admitted dreading violation from the train's first stop. Yet no guard had laid a hand. Another confessed fixating on the bread, white, soft, free of fillers. Bread was meant to be rare everywhere, but here, baskets refilled without fuss. Voicing relief seemed perilous, nearly disloyal to kin suffering, back home. Still, the proof was irrefutable. The camp's system felt intentional, almost performative, in its everyday flow. Dawn roll calls, tasks assigned lightly, checks done with lists, not lashes. The guards appeared oddly youthful, scarcely older than the captives, faces fresh, boots polished. Their poise stemmed from assurance, not aggression. For German women steeped in years of shortage and dread, that assurance felt foreign and maddening. The 24-year-old started noting details that gnawed at her. She saw a guard split a cigarette with a comrade, sharing quiet laughs as if war were a minor hassle, not a shattering force. She heard jazz tunes wafting softly from an officer's gramophone, lively, carefree, untouched by loss or triumph. She watched kitchen scraps hauled out, bits of bacon fat discarded, and her heart clenched thinking of kids in Hamburg or Leipzig scrapping over such treasures. The real torment lay not in strikes or scarcity, but in the stark evidence that the adversary could lavish plenty while her people scraped by. Moments of irony cut deep, almost wounding. Once, lining up for midday food, a guard mangled a German phrase so badly that laughter escaped several lips before guilt silenced it. He just grinned, unfazed, to mock an American and live. That alone cracked their known world. Another time, a woman dropped her tray, and a young guard knelt to help clean up. No sneer, just a shrug, a mutter in his tongue, and back to duty. She stood stunned, glimpsing a realm where goodwill pierced fences. Suspicion persisted, though. Surely, they assured themselves, this was fleeting. Cruelty would follow once guards were down. Some shunned the bacon, shredding it untouched to affirm they weren't fooled. Others stashed bread crusts in secret spots, bracing for abundance's end. The 24-year-old straddled pride and necessity, telling herself accepting sustenance wasn't surrender. Yet each morsel carried betrayal's tang of the regime's lies and the civilians still famished across Germany. By night, camp lights burned steady against the gloom. Beyond the wire, a continent lay in tatters, but inside, order, schedule, even security reigned. It was a knot they couldn't unravel. Permitted letters home were crafted carefully, details omitted, fearing skepticism. Who'd believe we're eating better here than you out there? It'd ring of betrayal or lunacy, or both. Yet it rang true. The Americans seemed almost unaware of their impact. To them, nourishing prisoners might just be protocol, a Geneva Convention clause. For the women, it twisted doubt's blade deeper. If captors upheld justice, providing meals and shelter, the barbaric American myth crumbled. And if that fell, what other deceptions lurked? The 24-year-old pondered her brother anew. Had he perished clutching the monster narrative? Gone to earth battling illusions while she dined under their gaze? The idea hollowed her. She couldn't voice it, not even to bunkmates. But the mental strife outshouted the war she'd escaped. Days flowed on, each repast a cue that the old era had vanished. Bacon transcended mere sustenance. It became armament, emblem, dare. It compelled questioning not just the foe, but oneself. Some grew more rigid, vowing unbreakable resolve, withholding smiles no matter the camp's tidiness. Others eased tentatively, grasping that endurance demanded more than resistance. The 24-year-old teetered between, split by appetite and dignity, remorse and respite. One evening, as the sun dipped below the wire, she sat solitary, eyeing smoke twist from kitchen stacks. Supper's aroma floated across the yard, bacon once more, mingling with potatoes and bread. She shut her eyes, letting the scent envelop her, and murmured a name unspoken since Leipzig's bombing, her brother's. For the first time, truth pressed like an edge. Perhaps the ultimate harshness wasn't in American beatings, but in their absence. And within that disquieting warmth lay a teaching she wasn't prepared to confront. Mornings kicked off with the bell's clang and the shuffle of boots across the yard. But soon another sound wove into the camp's routine, the low hum of voices hunched over books, pencils scratching on paper, awkward English words stumbling from German lips. The Americans weren't satisfied just feeding their captives. They aimed to educate them too. At first, the women scoffed bitterly at the idea, classes behind barbed wire. It struck them as ridiculous, another ploy to chip away at their dignity. But then guards unlocked a long shed, cleared it out, and arranged wooden benches in neat rows. A worn chalkboard appeared, along with crates of books, some pages yellowed with age, others fresh off the press. What started with bacon now extended to sentences. The 24-year-old entered the makeshift classroom warily, arms folded like a barrier. Around her, the others shifted with similar distrust, eyes flicking to the board where an American sergeant had chalked a single word: freedom. He underlined it twice, then grinned as if the concept itself could sustain them. The women traded uneasy looks, unsure what such a term demanded. Lessons started basic, with English phrases that tangled clumsily in their mouths. "Good morning. How are you?" "My name is..." The sergeant stretched out the sounds, his tone almost light-hearted, urging repeats. Some grumbled through gritted teeth, others snickered at slip-ups. The 24-year-old kept her expression stern, but as she murmured the words, they felt oddly buoyant on her tongue, lighter than her native gutturals. It threw her off balance. Beyond words, films came next. One afternoon, they were ushered into the mess hall where a projector whirred to life. The screen danced with scenes of devastated cities, bodies in striped garb, skeletal figures staggering through freed gates. The women watched in hushed stillness, faces drained, breaths short. Some muttered, "rejections." Others averted their eyes. The 24-year-old's gut twisted. She'd clung to the hope, or the wish, that such tales were overblown. But the footage held firm, raw, and unyielding. Bacon had been the initial jolt. This was a deeper, gloomier shock. The Americans didn't yell or demand admissions. They just let the visuals sink in, then resumed classes and readings as if saying, "Your old world is gone. Now grasp the tongue of a new one." Some resisted harder post-films, sinking into muteness. Others leaned in, craving not just meals, but insights, as if learning offered a path up from their shattered pasts. Facts seeped in like faint echoes. More than 370,000 German prisoners held by the United States, thousands of them women, dotted across Europe and beyond. Many camps boasted libraries with novels, histories, even verse. For women who'd seen books torched in squares not long ago, this flood of pages bewildered and enthralled. The 24-year-old grabbed a tattered Huckleberry Finn. She didn't catch every bit, but the story's flow pulled her along, the boy's wild liberty, strange yet magnetic. She read covertly at night, tucking it under her blanket like forbidden goods, though it was handed out freely. Not all sessions were soft. An officer once tasked them with writing about their youths, in English if they could, German otherwise. Bent over papers, they scrawled memories of farms, towns, mothers kneading dough, fathers home from shifts, school days blurred by conflict. He read some aloud, accent thick but earnest. Hers was among them. Hearing her halting words echoed back in the enemy's voice left her exposed. Yet in that vulnerability, something surprised her. The Americans weren't jeering, they were absorbing. Laughter slipped in unexpectedly. During one drill, the sergeant taught bacon. The room burst into chuckles before he finished scribbling. Women shared knowing glances, shoulders shaking. For a brief spell, the fences faded, the sheer oddity of foes naming the food that had upended their worlds too absurd to hold back. The sergeant smiled, chalk on his hands, letting the mirth fade naturally. Still, unease threaded through it all. Each class reminded them the Americans weren't merely nourishing bodies, but reshaping thoughts. The 24-year-old grappled with remorse whenever a lesson sparked joy. She thought of her brother lost under debris or dirt who'd never flip an American page or catch gramophone jazz. Of her mother who passed believing triumph was near. Was she dishonoring them by perching on a bench, echoing alien phrases, letting tales and tunes stir her? Yet shutting out felt like another demise. Camp papers, penned by inmates under watch, turned into debate grounds, pieces on politics, ideas, democracy's essence. The women pored over them cautiously, fingers inked, eyes widening at once taboo thoughts. To ponder, query, even doubt, these became quiet uprisings against history. Some shredded the sheets post-read, scared of the stirrings. Others stowed them like treasures. Bit by bit, the 24-year-old got pulled into learning's subtle shift. She started greeting guards in English, testing the sounds. She loitered near the bookshed, tracing spines. She caught herself humming a reel tune, stifling it under glares. It was as if the wires caged not just her form, but her convictions, each class snipping a gap for new vistas to seep through. But the teachings carried hurt, too. Another film showed U.S. troops handing out supplies in freed hamlets. A void ached in her. She recalled German kids clawing for bits, her own gnawing ache en route to capture. While she dined behind wire, her folks scraped by outside. The irony clawed at her, leaving her sleepless. The Americans sought no thanks, no oaths. They just persisted, feeding, instructing, revealing. It was a steady tactic, more enduring than any lash, more disruptive than a hit. She came to see their strongest tool wasn't firepower, but the faith that wisdom could unravel yesterday's bonds. One dusk, as the yard glowed crimson, she paused outside the class shed. In her grasp, a notebook of shaky English lines, script wobbly but resolute. She eyed the barbed strands, tips aglow in fading light. Ruins awaited beyond. Inside, lessons she secretly craved. For the first time, she pondered not what the Americans might inflict, but what they'd already sparked within. When the bell called for another session, she paused, feet leaden, caught between resistance and intrigue. Stepping in, she sensed the fight had pivoted again. Not guns or slogans, but a clash for her inner vision. And what the Americans lined up next would pierce sharper than words or tomes. The gates swung open with that familiar metallic creak, the same one that had once pulled them into confinement. But now it set them loose into a landscape they barely knew. Months, some even years, had slipped by behind the wire, and the women emerging weren't the ones who'd first caught the whiff of bacon with shock and doubt. The 24-year-old adjusted her modest bundle, a few clothes, a notebook scribbled with basic English lines, a book slipped to her by a thoughtful guard, and tried to steady herself. She'd endured captivity, but thriving beyond the fence seemed far less guaranteed. The train hauling them back to Germany rattled along, packed tight, rolling through scarred terrains, heavy with quiet. Villages lay in heaps, chimneys jutting like shattered fangs from the dust. Bridges dangled mangled over streams, their metal frames glinting in the light. The women pressed against the windows, hunting for anything familiar, finding only devastation. One murmured that the Americans had cared for them better than their own ruined towns ever could. Another suggested captivity might have been a hidden kindness. No one disagreed. Their minds weighed heavy with thoughts of orderly meals inside, while families back home lined up for hours over turnips and dark loaves. When the train halted, the 24-year-old stepped into turmoil. Crowds swirled, faces drawn and empty-eyed. Kids gripped mothers' hems, cheeks hollow, voices faint from want. She stood frozen, pulse racing, drowned in the clamor of desperation. For an instant, she yearned for the camp's structured cues, the reliable food, the predictable chimes. Guilt stabbed at her for even thinking it. Freedom should have tasted sweet. Instead, it carried the bite of cinders and loss. Her hometown had vanished, where tidy apartment blocks once stood, rubble now sprawled like scattered remains. She traced the street of her family's old place, only to find it leveled. A neighbor, hobbling with gray hair, shared that her brother never made it back. Her father fell at Stalingrad, her mother crushed under beams in a raid. The news hit plain and hard, carving out her core like a shell's blast. She lingered amid the debris, clutching her things, the remembered scent of bacon rising sharp and mocking in her nose. To have been nourished so well while her kin wasted away. Was that endurance or disloyalty? The following days blurred into an odd in-between. She stayed with far-off relatives who watched her warily. They'd borne famine, chill, and bombings. She'd been a captive, yet she'd eaten. Her face held some color, her build steadier than theirs. One kin snapped, "What did you trade the Americans for it?" She had no reply. How to convey that survival came through routine, meals, even books, without deals or shame. Her quiet only fueled their doubts. On the streets, whispers followed returnees. Some said the Americans had twisted their minds. Others jeered they'd fattened up in chains. Children gawked, eyes full of grudge, bellies bloated from lack. She dodged their stares, each one heavy with blame. Nights found her awake, hearing relatives toss, wondering if they begrudged her spot, if they saw her strength as hidden disgrace. Yet in the stillness the teachings echoed back. She recalled the chalked word freedom and films that had burned away her illusions. She thought of Huckleberry Finn's pages, the boy's bold drift on a raft, a tale free from dread. These clashed with the wreckage around her. The Germany she'd returned to was broken, not just in stone, but in soul. Neighbors grumbled about fault, vengeance, betrayal. She listened, but a new inner voice grew stronger, first sparked in that class shed. Guilt trailed her still. Each whiff of cooking, thin cabbage broth, scorched barley brew, triggered memories of bacon crackling in an American skillet. The difference crushed her. She ached to share, to describe the surreal twist, but knew it'd sound boastful, thankless, traitorous. So she buried it deep, the bacon's flavor turning from recall to secret, a load too weighty to voice. One afternoon, she passed a throng around a truck where aid workers doled out cans. Kids scrambled. Women reached with frail arms. She hovered at the fringe, bundle in hand, until a man in foreign gear passed her one. She eyed the label, American. It squeezed her throat. The war was done, yet here the foe fed her people again. She wanted to yell, to hurl it into the ruins, but her fingers held tight. She took it home. Relatives pried it open eagerly, scooping contents into a pot, lauding the plenty. She stayed silent, but something inside moved. The enemy had sustained her in bonds. Now they nourished her shattered land. The thread was impossible to miss. As weeks dragged, she turned to her notebook once more. Awkward English phrases, memory fragments, questions that wouldn't quiet. Sometimes about her brother, sometimes her mother, often the camp, bacon's aroma, guard's hush, chalk dust on fingers. Relatives spotted her once, scowling at the foreign script. Why waste ink on their words, they pressed? She looked down, but inside she knew it linked her to a realm not crumbled to dust. Gradually, she grasped that captivity hadn't ended at the gate. It lingered within, in the tug between past echoes and harsh now, between drilled lies and lived truths. Free in form, chained in mind, split by duty to the gone and the stark facts she'd witnessed. The bacon, books, reels. They hadn't just sustained her, they'd reshaped her. Ignorance was no longer an option, no matter how she wished it. One evening, she wandered back to her street's ruins. The sun hung low, shadows stretching over fractured stone. She sat on a rock, opened her notebook, and penned one English line. "I am still alive." The words looked delicate on paper, yet they felt mightier than any uniform she'd donned. She shut the book, holding it close, letting quiet settle. Bacon's echo persisted, no longer mere meal, but sign, gift and burden. Proof of a space past the wire, where rivals nourished rather than deprived, words overruled whips, tomes outdid orders. Not pity, not pardon, but something riskier. Potential. Gazing at her city's wreckage, she saw survival wasn't war's close. It marked a fresh one's start, not with arms, but memories, regrets, and a slender hope that humanity might rise from the dust. She stood, notebook under arm, steps measured yet firm. The avenues rang with want and resentment. But within her, Bacon's sizzle endured, murmuring of paradoxes, unsettling facts, futures yet to be shaped. As darkness fell, clarity hit, terrifying, freeing. The fighting had ceased, but the true struggle for sense had only begun.